He was quite comfortable to tell his story. Yeah, I went off one way, she went off another way, and I never saw her again. What is he not telling us?
She got along with everyone. What you saw is what you got with her. She was excited about her gap year away.
She was a beautiful, talented, loving daughter. Grace was our sunshine, and she will be missed forever.
On her birthday, she'd gone off the radar.
It's New Zealand. Things like that don't happen.
Police in New Zealand are continuing to search for a missing British backpacker.
Grace Millanne.
Grace is still
There was
missing.
so much CCTV.
It's all recorded.
What happened to Grace?
At the moment, we don't have any evidence of foul play.
Doesn't make sense.
Jesse Shane Kempson. We needed to contact him. He was the last person to have commented. We hold grave fears for his safety. He was the man on the CCTV. We watched second by second, minute by minute, hour by hour. We couldn't afford to miss anything of who Jesse Kempson is.
There's something you want to ask?
Did you kill Grace Millanne?
It is an unbearable time for the Millanne family, and our hearts go out to them.
There is this overwhelming sense of hurt and shame.
It's toxic.
Candlelight vigils will be held around the country in solidarity for Grace.
She was shamed and blamed. People were so quick to judge and blame Grace.
Your daughter should have been safe here, and she wasn't, and I'm sorry for that.
How do you plead?
Not guilty.
He did what she asked him to do. This death was an accident.
One lie can spread so quickly. We had to find the truth.
Hello, everyone. My name is Heather Hurt. I am here with the NRW, where nerds rule the world, and I am here with Helena Coan, the director and documentarian for The Lie, the murder of Grace Millanne. How are you today?
Hi, yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. How are we're getting close. Your documentary comes out on the 29th on demand and in theaters. How are you feeling as we get closer and closer?
I'm pretty terrified about it, but it's a responsibility I don't take lightly to make this film, but I'm also very proud of it, and I think that it really gets the message across that we set out to do. And the fact it's being released in cinemas as well is a big achievement. So yeah, I'm scared but excited as always when a film comes out.
Absolutely. And let's go right off into that. How did Grace's story come to you? How did you find her story?
So a few years ago, I made a feature documentary about Audrey Hepburn, and the producers at GFC Films in New Zealand, Matthew and Tom, saw it and then reached out to me, and we were trying to find a project to work on with each other for a while. And then we talked about Grace's story, and it was a story that I remembered very clearly. I remember when she went missing, and obviously I'm in the UK, and the news here was, desperately trying to find her. And it was just something that had stuck with me, not just her death itself, but what happened in the courtroom and the way she was treated afterwards. And I just wanted to have the opportunity to tell her story in the right way and to tell the truth of what actually happened to her, and try and reduce some of the misinformation and the lies that were spread about her death.
Absolutely. And that's it. You can really tell throughout the documentary how important it was to talk about the re-victimization of Grace and many other women like her. We're seeing that more and more in true crime documentaries, where they talk about victim blaming and victim shaming. But this one, you really spent a good chunk of the documentary talking about how they handled not just her case, but a previous victim as well. Let's talk a bit. Why was that so important to have it as a much larger conversation in your documentary? I
think it would be such an omission if I wasn't to talk if I didn't talk about that aspect of the case, because it was so horrendous to me. And when I was researching this project, I found that so difficult to see how she was treated, but also how other women who had been abused by the accused were treated in the courtroom, and how they were literally berated, told that they were lying, and that they'd made it all up and it wasn't true, and the person that was lying was him. And this idea that you can be treated so awfully still. I think the idea, because I'm a very optimistic person, and I kind of thought we had gone a bit further as a society of not treating women like that in the courtroom, especially victims who are coming forward and saying, this man did this awful thing to me. Are we not past the point where we just sit there and go, no, he didn't, you're lying? Like, to me, that's just a lazy defense, because they had nothing. So all they were trying to do was make these women look like liars, and including Grace, essentially, who wasn't there to defend herself. And I also, as part of this film, I interviewed Kempson's ex-girlfriend, whose voice you hear in the film, and it felt like kind of connecting these women who had never actually met together, but they'd all suffered at the hands of this man, and trying to piece their stories together and create this bigger picture of who he was and the lies that he told, and them kind of helping to unravel them.
And it's done so beautifully. It's done very well. It's done very respectfully, and and you even get like some extra facts there at the end, which it's really distressing to know the true numbers that are impacted by this. How many people just, one person just blames one person for being a little bit sexual, and all of a sudden someone has a reduced sentence by up to 50% is absolutely atrocious still today. Looking at watching the documentary was very interesting. Many of us who are, always seems weird to say true crime fans, because nobody ever wants to be a fan of someone dying. But for those of us who watch a lot of true crime documentaries, it's very interviewee. There's mostly, it's very verbiage. It's very, you see a lot of cops on screen. You see a lot of victims on screen. But your documentary mostly was CCTV footage or images or video from the courtroom. And we're seeing that more and more. Do you like doing more evidential versus interview style?
Yeah, I think definitely with kind of where I'm at in my career now, I'm moving into narrative films now. So I'm currently in development on a couple of narrative projects, and I felt with this documentary, I really wanted to, part of the reason I wanted to do this, because it gave me an opportunity to do something that I hadn't done before in terms of creatively building a story out of maybe 80% CCTV footage was something that I've never done. And the first ever little documentary I made when I was like 20 or 19 or something was just built out of someone's archive footage, just a woman that I met. And it felt like kind of going full circle and making something that really pushed me. This film was the most challenging thing I've ever done. It's the most challenging film I've made. And a big part of that was watching that CCTV footage over and over again. Our edit was about 9 months in total. So it shifts the way you see the world as well. And I wanted the film to feel like an immersive experience. It's a nightmare. I want people to be in it and not be taken out by seeing someone in a studio talking. It's happening now, and the audience is an observer, and they're on that journey with Grace.
And you're in it. Can you talk about that process a little bit? Once again, a lot of us are used to seeing very interview style, and we know that can be sometimes just like one cut and you're done. You don't talk to someone for maybe months before the film comes out. But this, you clearly had to do a lot of work to get this archival data. Can you tell me a little bit about that process?
We had Detective Scott Beard on our side, which was, we couldn't have made this film without him. And we also had Grace's mum's blessing, and I wouldn't have made the film without her. So that gave us access to that, you know, there is some CCTV footage from this that's now in the public domain, but still there was a lot of it that I was basically sent the evidence folder by the police. And it was very hard looking through all of that and reading the details of the case. But it was very important to me to kind of comb through every last piece of evidence that there was to make sure that I was telling the story as factually correct and truthfully as possible. And yeah, it was a really intense research project, but also at the same time, it was different to other films I've made where, you know, like, for example, making a film about Audrey Hepburn, there is countless pieces of footage of her, like it never ends. Whereas with this, you've got the CCTV, you've got the courtroom, you've got the interview tapes, and that's kind of it. And so it was much more a process of kind of a puzzle of figuring out where each bit goes and how to kind of rearrange those different mediums, rather than trying to collate as much as we can. So that, and it was having that kind of, having my creativity, I guess, restrained in that way, was a really interesting and challenging and exciting thing to do, of kind of how do you build the story just with this. Yeah.
And I really want to look up Audrey. I watched the trailer while I was doing research on you, and I was just like, oh my gosh, it looks like such a cool documentary. And I know we're not supposed to be talking about that. But when you're deciding on work to do, what really pulls something in? What pulled you into Audrey versus something like this?
I think that there's a common theme in my work, which is about women who have been misunderstood or reduced to something that they're not, and kind of retelling their story and reframing it. And I make both documentaries and narrative work, and that theme kind of goes across both of them, whether it's a horror film or a documentary about Audrey Hepburn. It's stories about misunderstood women, and Grace was one of them. She was misunderstood and misrepresented in the media, and, you know, on social media and in YouTube comments and all of that. And I wanted to say, hang on a minute, I can't just let this sit as it is. This was not her fault. This could have happened to anybody. It could have happened to me. And trying to show her as, you know, I've never met Grace, but I spent a lot of time with her on this film, and she seemed like a really, really genuinely wonderful person. I spent countless hours reading through her tweets, and she was really funny and often would make me laugh. And, you know, I feel a connection with anyone I make a film about, and that is really important to me.
Phenomenal. What would you like people, other than what we've already talked about, you know, listening to women, understanding women, what additional things would you like people to take out of Grace's story?
I think I really want young men to watch this film and understand that, you know, if they see a young man, one of their friends, acting in a certain way towards a girl that maybe doesn't feel quite right, or something is making them feel uncomfortable, to be able to talk about it and see where that can lead. I think there is this real misunderstanding that men like Kempson that commit these sort of atrocious crimes are other, and they're monsters, and it's something other than us. And actually these men, I read an amazing quote making this film, which has always stuck with me, of he's not a monster, he's one of the patriarchy's healthy sons. And I see that as these men are created by this society that we live in, and young men and men in general have the power to change it. Women have been trying for years, and it ends up falling on deaf ears. And I want young men to see this film and understand this threat that women live with, and try and talk about it with their friends, because all of this kind of stuff can shift that perspective, and I think that's really important. And yeah, I just think parents as well with sons, to teach their son, obviously I don't want young kids to watch this film, but to teach their sons about violence against women, where it comes from, and how it's you know, catcalling a woman on the street and murdering a woman are two sides of the same coin. They're not as far away as people think. And I just want people to understand the threat that women live with, and to have more empathy to it as well, because it's empathy that changes the world, in my opinion.
Speaking of that, there's actually a part very close to the beginning when you hear the concept of catfishing, and you hear it from a man's perspective. Do you think that part of this documentary also kind of wants to emphasize that it can be both men, women, and everyone in between that could be impacted by this?
By catfishing?
By just sex crimes, by anything like that?
Oh. Yeah, definitely. I think that's always what I felt making this is, that it could have been me. It could have been any of my friends. It's something that affects all of us. And the more we talk about it and the more we show it, in an unflinching way, however difficult it is to look at, you have to look at it. I think for so long, conversations about sexual violence have been brushed under the carpet. People don't want to face it because it's uncomfortable. How do you talk about that? And I think films, hopefully, like this will just, the reason I made this film was because if it could save one woman's life, then that's why I wanted to make it. Someone could watch this and be like, oh my God, I recognize that behavior in my partner or in someone I know. And that to me is like, that's why I wanted to do it. And I always made it very clear to Grace's mum that's why I wanted to do it as well. There had to be a reason for this. I've been asked to make true crime, if you call this true crime, before, and I've said no because there was no greater purpose to it. Whereas for this, there is a purpose, and I hope I've got that across.
You did. Talking about how people see film, one thing that really stuck out, just going back to the CCTV information, is how we can watch movies at a much more abrupt way. Do you think film is changing, especially in the documentarian space, that audiences can handle more?
Yeah, and I think that almost is a danger as well, because I think people become desensitized to it and they become a bit numb and it becomes normalized. And I don't want it to become normalized. And I think in this film, I was very clear to never show anything kind of overly graphic or try and not go in. There were a lot of details in this film that we never put in or we took out because it just felt like too much. And I want people to be in that experience and just watching someone who is having a very innocent and lovely time. It's her birthday. She's on a first date, and understanding that this was not her fault and that she was just doing something that all young women or women of any age do, and to not get caught up in the, it almost doesn't feel like a true crime documentary to me. It doesn't feel like other, because I've been interested. If I wasn't a filmmaker, I'd be a detective. Like I've always said that. So that it is a side of life that really interests me. But I also can see how the balance has slightly shifted, and I didn't want to get into that murky world of making something that feels like it's being made for entertainment's sake only. Like this is a story that I felt needed to be told, and I wanted to tell it properly.
Awesome. Great answer. I was going to say, so there were times where I was just like, but other than that, this was a very, very respectful documentary. It was beautiful.
What were the times where you felt?
There were some times in the courtroom, but I think it was more, I was just mad at who was saying the things they were saying versus like the actual images. And then of course you have him coming out of the elevator and you're like, oh, yeah, with the bags, and you're like, yeah. But it's you have to be in the story and you have to understand what you are trying to say to the audience. And it was done respectfully, but there were just moments where I was just like, whew, maybe I've watched too many of these. Yeah, it's a lot. So once again, you said this is kind of your first true foray into true crime. I'll keep that title there. What will you take going forward with your future work from this?
I think in terms of creatively, I kind of, if I was, because as I mentioned, I'm moving into kind of the narrative space, and I'm actually making a horror film, which is got strange, it was strange making this and and developing a horror film at the same time, because there's like similarities are quite terrifying, because the horror that I'm making is about young women as well. I think if I was to do another documentary, it would need to kind of challenge me creatively as much as this did, and I wouldn't want to do a sit down talking heads kind of cut to archive, cut back kind of interview, kind of documentary, and it would have to be something that I felt could have an impact, like I felt with this, and something that I felt like I could do justice. And anything I do, I've got to feel a personal connection in some way and feel a lot of empathy for the person that I'm presenting. So yeah, I think I want to. It's a hard question to answer, because I guess moving into narrative work, I've made narrative short films, but making a narrative feature, I think it is that sense of empathy and making sure that I'm putting young women on screen who maybe you haven't heard their story before, or you think you know what happened, or you think you understand this type of character, whatever, and then kind of turning it on its head and revealing the truth of who they are.
Wonderful. Oh, cannot wait. Big horror fans. I cannot wait to see that. Thank you so much, Helena, which I'm going to try and say correctly. Helena. Sorry, from Texas. I'm going to say it. The Lie, The Murder of Grace Millan is in theaters and on demand on March 29th. And I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.